ready? Okay.
Okay, my first meeting, I was told I was in charge, so here we go. Call this meeting to order of the Finance Committee. I'll get back to my stuff here. So roll call, or do we need to do anything else?
Nope, that's
Okay, okay.
Sorry. We are having another staff member trained, so it might take just a bit. 1 second.
Here.
Whitus,
Here.
Buckley, Pinkley,
Here.
Yancey. Here. Romine. Denham. Here. Milton. Dobbins.
Here.
Mr. Whitus, we have a quorum.
Thank you. So now we need the approval of the minutes from the April 29th meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, presentation of regular reports.
Okay, so Tuesday night I was supposed to present the first quarter presentation for the financials, and so I want to put them in here, and I want to move them up on the agenda. Melissa, can you pull that up for me, please? One reason why I wanted to do that is because these financials represent through the end of March, and after that we're going to go through the financials for April, so I didn't want to confuse as far as timing goes, so that's why we're moving that up. There's Mr. Buckley right now. Okay, so we're going to just go ahead and just keep in mind the end of March, and I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly because I will show them again to the board as a whole, but I just wanted to make sure you all had the opportunity to see them as well. So this is the revenues versus expenditures for all governmental funds. So for those of you who haven't been with us for a while, so that you're fairly new to this, all governmental funds are things like your general fund, your public safety fund, your tourism fund, your debt service fund. The only thing that will be outside of your governmental funds are your proprietary funds that are directly related, water, sewer, their fund, and the internal service funds. Both of those are proprietary, and when I mean proprietary, those are business-run funds, so we would operate those similar to private world business. Everything else will be operated on a government finance basis. So this is all the governmental funds, including all your transfer ins and outs. Your revenues are $18.6 million and your expenditures were $12.9 versus last year. We started staggering these so that you could see the difference. Last year in 2020, you had $22.3 million and your expenditures were $13.1. Keep in mind for last year, COVID, as we know it, had not really started yet, so those numbers will definitely change as we move throughout the year. The clicker's not working. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so this is your general fund revenues. General fund revenues is the only unrestricted fund, and so things like your finance department, your legal fees, your planning department, your engineering, all of those make up the general fund category. So these are the main revenue generating categories within the general fund. Your license and permits, they increased by $16,884 from the prior year, and they decreased $182,000 from 2019. But one thing I will note for you is that in 2019, we had 3 businesses that had a permit, and that really jumped that number up. So when you're thinking about 2019, 2020, and now 2021, I always like to point out the caveats that maybe take away from that trend. And there were 3 large businesses that did get to open that have large permit fees that would skew that number just a bit. Your court receipts, they continue to decline. Your leases and rents, they decreased by $65,221. I will tell you in this category, that's all your West 76 leases in there. And so we did adjust one of the larger leases down, and we did adjust some of those leases for COVID as well. This is your general fund revenue and expenditure. So this is a picture in whole, including your transfer ins and outs. And I should say, for those of you who haven't experienced this very long, the transfer in and outs, those are things like we transfer out to the public safety for a subsidy out of the general fund. We transfer out of the general fund for a subsidy to the Parks and Rec Department. We also transfer out of the general fund for the convention center and for the TIFs, the debt service, and those kind of things. So that when I say including transfer ins and outs, that's what I mean. And so your revenues decreased by 1.7 million, and that's due to a decrease and a decline in the taxes, and then your expenditures decreased by 346,000. This is a look at just the taxes, the gross sales tax for all governmental funds. We have it split up into 4 categories for you: your general fund, your tourism fund, your transportation fund, and your public safety fund. Tourism, transportation, and public safety, they're all special revenue funds, meaning they all have a special tax or a revenue that are associated with those, so we have to keep those separate. So general fund sales tax at the end of the first quarter was down 9.6% in comparison to 2020. Your tourism tax was up 1.1% in comparison to first quarter 2020. Transportation tax, those are a half cent, 9.6% down, and public safety is a half cent, and that's 9.6% down as well. Typically, when you see the general fund sales tax, the other two, the transportation and the public safety, will typically mirror that because those are all resales tax. The tourism tax is a little bit different. And then this is a picture of the sales tax, but this is net of TIF. So when we say net of TIF, we've pulled out the TIF districts so that you can see how the overall operations for the rest of the cities are going. General fund, tourism, transportation, this is net of TIF, and so you can see we're $284,328 less than 2020, 12% decrease when you take out the TIF districts. And a tourism sales tax is a 2.9% decrease when you take out the TIF districts. So what that says, if you're thinking about it, what it says is, remember we just said it was 9.6% decrease, but when you remove the TIF districts, you're a 12% decrease. So the TIF districts were doing a bit better. And when you remove those, it makes the operations decline just a bit more. Okay. Here is the public safety fund, the public safety sales tax fund. We do a subsidy, the general fund does a subsidy, and it's typically the 7.6 million, the 7.6 million out of the general fund into the public safety tax fund. That number came from the 2017 budget for operations, and that's when all of that was generated. However, due to COVID, we did a 25% decrease on the subsidy for the public safety and a 25% decrease on the Parks and Rec too. So you'll see that one in just a little bit. So we've broke that up for you so that the green section you can see is the subsidy amount in the revenue column, and then the yellow column is their actual tax, which is 1.3 million. So I think I just said all of what the slide shows, but the total revenues are 2.8 million. Your expenditures are 2.5, which leaves a net increase of about $250,000. I think the batteries might be going out on this little thing. Okay. Tourism fund, this is a look at just your tourism fund. This includes the transfer ins and the transfer outs. This is your revenues and your transfer ins. They're $84,000 more than 2020. So When we say we're up 1% or a little bit more than 1%, I mean, if you include the transfer ins and stuff, it's not much. So I want to point that out to you. And the expenditures and the transfer outs are 59,000 more than 2020. So the expenditures are up, the taxes are up, so the net difference is small. And the other thing I want to point out and say is Melissa's going to go over the sales tax and how we're faring as of the end of April in just a few minutes. But I want to state this, and I believe she's probably going to state it too. We went back to the sales tax because of COVID and the pandemic year. I think it's really, really important. When you see these numbers on the sheets that you're going to see up 55%, up 70%. And for somebody just looking on, wow, that appears amazing. We're doing awesome this year. However, I want to tell you that it's extremely important for you to take a 12-month view from last year to the current month to say, are we still really up or are we having to make up for the pandemic? Does that make sense? So take a 12-month view from March to March or from April to April and really look at the business flow. Because I will tell you that we've already gone back and done that. The rolling 12 that you're going to see in a minute hasn't caught up with this yet, so we've been doing it on our own, so I can tell you those numbers. So we are at about a 21% decrease, 12-month look for sales tax, and about a 15 to 16% decrease still for the tourism tax. So really what that means is we still have some to make up as a result of the pandemic. So even though the numbers are great, and I'm extremely thankful for the numbers and how they're faring, we need to be cautious that instead of saying, oh, we're doing awesome, we've still got some to make up. So I just want to keep that in your mind when she's going over the taxes in case it sparks any additional questions for you. This is a look at your Parks and Rec Fund. And we do the same thing with that we do with the public safety. We show you the subsidy piece separate from their income. And so that you can see, remember I just said that we reduced the subsidy again for 25%. So their subsidy is at $187,500 for the first quarter, and their revenues are at $342,514. Oh, sorry. I messed up the water sewer. Okay, so here's your water sewer fund, and remember I said this one is a proprietary fund. We have to operate it a little bit differently than we do all the other funds. Revenues are at a $286,000 more. Expenditures are $72,000 less. And I will tell you, you'll see the consumption reports in your package. Consumption is starting to go up, and so that's a good thing. And then this is a new slide for all of you that have not seen it. And we know that we've gotten a few questions about the debt, which is good. And every time we get questions, we want to make sure we address it publicly as well. So we're going to include it in our slide presentation and wherever else that we need to include it for the assurance of our community and what's really happening. So here is a look at the overall debt, and we put it into a slide presentation. So in 2011, we started at $264 million, really almost $265 million worth of debt. Right now, we're down to $165.6 million, with anticipation in the next year of that declining even further because our tourism tax debt will be paid off the first of this next year. So that's little less than $100 million that we've paid down in 10 years. And that also includes the $12 million that we had to take out as a result of the 76. So I wanted to keep that picture in front of you, and we'll probably change it every 6 months because that's when our debt payments come and that's when we start to pay it down. But I wanted to show you that picture just so that you have a gauge of how to ask questions and what you need to know regarding this information. And really, that's my report for the first quarter. And if there's any questions, we'll go ahead and take those questions now regarding that, or we can just keep moving forward to April, the month of April, whichever y'all would prefer. Is there any questions at this moment? None? Okay, so we will keep going. Melissa, if you want to start in with your tax reports. That's okay.
Okay, so I know we have a couple new committee members in today, so I just wanted to take a brief time to explain the tax reports, how we report on these tax reports. I will also do them by report. So the first section here is we have our 1% general sales tax. So just for your knowledge, the sales tax is collected by the state and then remitted back to us. So when we are looking here, let me zoom in just a little bit. So when we show that we have May receipts, that is primarily March business activity paid to the Department of Revenue in April and then remitted to us in May. So for March business activity, May receipts, we were up 66.2% compared to the same year last year, or same month last year. So you can see last month we were at 24.7%. So this is really where we're going to start seeing the impacts of COVID on how tax receipts were actually affected. The next important piece of this here is looking down at our year-to-date tax receipts. I'm sorry, I did forget just real quickly up here at the top. So when we're looking at May over May receipts being up 66.2% compared to 2020, we were actually up 23.2% compared to May 2019. So instead of just comparing the previous year because of the impact, we're also looking at previous years to give us an idea of what's going on. And then down here at the bottom, you see year-to-date receipts. So year-to-date receipts, January through May, are up 4.9% compared to the same period last year. And then if you look back to 2019, we are up 0.2%. The next report here is our 0.5% transportation sales tax. So it's essentially going to mirror the 1% general sales tax. So for the month, we were up 70.8%. And for the year, we're up 4.7%. Public safety tax here, we were up 71.4% compared to May 2020. And year to date, we're at 4.8%. On our next reports, the tourism tax is actually collected in-house. So we know at the end of each month, if we have processed all tourism tax receipts, generally this happens. There's usually not any carryover month to month. So these are accurate numbers for the most part. And then you can see when we say we collect it in April because it's collected in-house, the majority of these receipts are going to be for March business activity. So compared to April 2020 receipts, we are up 415.9%. When I look back to 2019, we are up 41%. So March activity is up, even compared to 2019. And at the bottom, just like the sales tax, you can see our year-to-date numbers. We are up 57.7% for the year. And compared to 2019, we are up 23% year-to-date.
Keep in mind, that's the first 4 months and what I said about the rolling 12. That's why I prefaced it, because we know the numbers look really good.
And then the final report here for tourism tax, we break this out by classification. So you can see both a year-to-date and a same-month comparison, and this is going to be broken out by amusements, theaters, hotels and motels, campground, nightly rentals, and restaurants and concessions. For our new committee members, just keep in mind that we have a 4% tourism tax that goes for everything except restaurants and concessions, and that tax rate is 0.5%. If anyone has any questions, comments?
Yes, why Jamie gotta drag me down.
You gotta have one optimist and one pessimist, that you just gotta have it to show the true picture.
So I'm not a finance guy, but
You're okay.
even still, with the deficit from last year, with the reduced revenue from last year, I look at these numbers and go back, take your pick. I mean, yes, we've got to make up a shortfall from 2020, but to me, it's indicative of these numbers going back, like this report I'm looking at the moment goes back to 2012. And so even compared to then, we're up, 200%. And so I get what you're saying, but I also look at this and say, this to me is indicative of if these numbers continue with this trend, looks like we could have a really good year financially.
You're absolutely correct. And so I tell you that on the rolling 12 to let you know that we do have a gap to make up. However, if the trend continues the same, whereas we thought it was going to be 2023 before we were whole again, if this trend continues, it'll be a lot less time that we have to make up. Does that make sense? So you're right on the right track. If these continue in these trends, I love the trends, but I still need to let you know that there is still a gap to make up. So just be cautious when you're looking at what we're gonna buy and, ooh, we got more money, so what can we buy? Be cautious that we still have to make up some. But if these trends continue, it's a good trend, so we need to watch those trends, because if the summer months are our bigger months, our larger months, June, July, and August are kind of the waymakers, I will say, for the year for what we do. So keep in mind, we're gonna look at those, and then it's 2 months time lag. So what we're presenting to you as far as April numbers will be February's. So we still have some way to make up, but you're exactly right. If we continue on this trend, we'll close that gap a lot quicker than we had originally anticipated.
And I think one other area that we're especially cautious with are just because we've had some issues with Department of Revenue and reporting of the taxes, and it occurs every month where we're actually having to go back and audit some of the numbers just to make sure that they're correct. So we're always a little bit cautious just because there have been some pretty big variances that we've seen. So that's one other area that we watch every single month whenever we receive our sales taxes.
To the point where we're gonna start charging them a 1% admin fee. It's that bad.
Okay, so this is the rolling 12 report, and this is what Jamie keeps referring back to. So what happens on this report is we take the dollars that we receive and we actually put them back into the business activity month. So when I show February receipts here, this is when business actually occurred in February. So if you remember, whenever we got our tax receipts, at first it appeared that February is up. We were a little bit surprised with that because we lost, I think, about a week with the snow. And now when we're actually going back in and putting that business activity in, we can see that February's activity was actually down 7.4% compared to the prior year. Now, one thing to remember, because this is called the rolling 12 report, we are continually updating that very far right column, and we will continue to add tax receipts as we receive them and future disbursement periods from the Department of Revenue. So these numbers will continue to change. Just to give you a little bit of an idea. So last month, whenever I presented January business activity, we were at that point down, 9%. So this month, whenever I went in and actually put that business activity back into the month that it occurred, now we are only down 6.2%. So a pretty decent sized chunk of our tax receipts in May were all the way back for December business activity. So I think that this report is important, and it gives you, a better idea. So even November, we were down 20.4% last month, and now this month with the new receipts, we were only down 19.7%. And then the next page of this rolling 12 report is also pretty important. So if you look all the way over in that far right column there where it says growth, this is annual growth rate in the economy, and this is for a 12-month prior period. So we are comparing February 2021 for the previous 12 months all the way back to February 2020. And at this point, we are still at a decrease of 18.9%.
I would say one of the things that people look at me crazy, Jamie and I were really excited about 2020 because it started off to be a boom. And then COVID came along.
Boom.
I think 2020 was going to be our new record year, quite honestly, but until COVID hit us. And so these numbers right now still are just that. They're in that time frame where we were doing really, really well, and we were really excited.
Okay, and then just one more quick thing to point out for the new members. So next to that negative 18.9, that 224 million, that is actual sales that occur in the city that are sales taxable. So far over the last 12 months, we have seen a loss of $200 and just about $25 million in sales. And then this next report here, this is our unrestricted tax report. So in this column here titled Total Sales Tax 1% Receipts, this will always match the 1% receipt sales tax report that we looked at first. The next column here is going to be less the Branson Landing, Branson Hills, and Aquarium at the Boardwalk tax receipts. This area that's grayed out in the top, just to provide a little bit of an explanation, those tax receipts will not include the aquarium at the Boardwalk. Previously, we had separate columns for Branson Landing, Branson Hills, but because we only have one business located in the aquarium at the Boardwalk TIF, we cannot report those sales out individually because that would be giving away their, proprietary information. So we will now group all of those together going forward. So this column is the sales tax receipts for all of those TIF districts for the month. This third column over here is what is remaining after those TIF payments go out of that. And then this is the total increase or decrease over the prior year. So right now we see an increase of $277,000. Just for that month. And then if you look down here at the bottom, just like the other sales tax reports, this will give you a year-to-date picture. So year-to-date, we are looking at an $89,000 increase in spendable sales tax dollars.
And just so you all know that this report is important to show you, because the TIFs, one of the TIFs capture 100% of all the taxes coming in to go to debt service. Two of the TIFs capture 50% of that. So the other 50%, the 50% that goes to debt service, it's not ours to spend. So when we report these numbers, we created this report years ago to show you that we have to extrapolate those numbers because those go to debt service to pay those debts. And then this is what's left over for spending, just FYI on that.
Okay, and then the next report here does the same thing for our tourism tax receipts. So again, this column will match what is on our tourism tax reports. The next column removes tourism tax payments for the TIF districts. This is the tourism tax receipts remaining after the TIF bond payments. And then lastly, this is our spendable dollars. So for the month, we saw an increase of $1.1 million. Year to date, we're just shy of $1 million. Now, our last report here, just to give a brief explanation of it, you have a 5-year history of our sales tax receipts. These are actual receipts, and then we create a budget of what we would expect to receive based off of a monthly average and what is put into the budget. So for 2021, Jamie forecast sales tax receipts of $9.5 million, and you can see what we would expect to receive for each month here. So at this point, through our May receipts, we received 58% higher than what we normally would have anticipated. And then year-to-date, we are at a 23.3% increase above expected budget.
So just really quickly, when we entered that budget season, y'all are gonna understand, we are conservative in the way we budget our numbers in hopes that it's elevated higher than what we came in at. But if we can budget on a more conservative level and balance a budget on a conservative level, that's just better for the city if we do better. So that's why we do it that way, and we budgeted slightly up in '21, because honestly, we had no idea what was coming for this year. So that's why we're doing it that way, and we're thankful the way it's turning out in comparison to budget. So hopefully the trends will continue.
Okay, and then our last report here is the tourism tax receipts monthly budget. So you can see that we were up 183% compared to what we expected to receive for the month. And year-to-date, we are up 115.9% to the budget. And that will conclude my report unless anyone has any additional questions.
No questions? Okay, we can move on. The next section is your April 30th financial reports. Included in these reports, we give you, I'll just call it an income statement, your balance sheet, and then we also created a cash by fund report. The thing I'm gonna say before, and some of you have been on this committee for a long time, could probably quote what I'm about to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because what I want you to understand is that all of three of these financial pictures that we're about to show you, they tie back together. If there's ever a time that they don't tie back together, please ask, because that is a checkpoint for you all and for everyone else to know the financials and to know how they work. So the fund balance, can you scroll up or whatever that, yeah, okay. So the fund balance, you'll see at the end of this report, these are your income statements that I'm gonna go over, but the fund balance is at the very bottom, and you can see that. So that fund balance, the unreserved fund balance, will tie back to your balance sheet fund balance. And then the balance sheet will tie back to the cash by fund report through the cash levels. So those are a way that you can check the finance department to make sure if there's an anomaly or if some reason that they don't tie, let us know. And I'm gonna say there's two exceptions to that rule, and I'm about to tell you why. The general fund will have an exception because there's a couple of minor funds that are tied up in the general fund. And then for public safety, there's the minor funds. There's a couple of minor funds that are tied up into that fund. But we do a reconciliation with those minor funds, and if you ever want to see those, we will be glad to tell you that. So the courts have a fund that is tied up in the general fund, and it's a minor fund. And then there's what we call a safety fund that is tied up into the general fund, not to be confused with the public safety fund. This safety fund is safety monies that we get, like monies from the insurance for things that we're doing. You'll see Bob Smithers, he's our safety officer. Those are monies that we can use to make it more safe, safer restrictions, those kind of things around here. Those are the two funds at the moment that are the minor funds that are tied up in the general fund. And they will be the reconciling item with the general fund. And then for the police fund, they have a little bit more. They have a police training fund, shop with the cop. They have inmate security fund. They have a forfeiture fund and a canine fund. They have several minor funds that we have to treat specifically, and they have very detailed guidelines for how you spend that money. So those are the funds that will be tied up into the police public safety fund. That will be the reconciling item difference for them. All of the other ones, you should see it flow just exactly as I said. Okay, so we'll get to the income statement. If I could, yeah, see the whole picture, there you go. Okay, so this is your revenues. This is actual to date as of April 30th, 2021. Then you have your 2020 and your 2019 there as well for a picture for you. The reason why we do it this way, you also have that expect 33% up there, so I'm gonna speak to that real quick. That would be if we took our budget and we divided it by 12 and assumed that for the first quarter, 33.3% of our budget should be spent and should be brought in. That would be for a city who doesn't have a ton of tourism and who can pretty much straight line things. This, we have more than 80% tourism, so it's a little bit harder to benchmark it that way. We put it there just so you can see it. But a better benchmark for you all to see is to look at year over year. And we just showed you those other budget reports, and you can gauge it that way as well too. But we try to give you as much information as possible so that you can gauge really how the city's doing financially by these measures. Okay, so your revenues are at 6.4 million versus last year at 7.9 million. And we are still playing a little bit of catch up. Now, our license and permits fees are doing better this year, as you'll notice. And some of the items are doing a bit better this year. So we're going to catch up, and we're going to maybe this year catch up, but we were on a plan to be whole by 2023. So we'll go down to the expenditures. Here is all the categories. Under this expenditure column is all the categories that are the expense items for the general fund. This is your budget amount. The first column, the second column is the actual spend as of April 30th. And again, you have 2 years to benchmark it from. So you're at, in total, 2.8 million of expenditures versus 2.7 last year. One thing to note is that we had wage increase, a 3% merit in there. And so you'll have to gauge it that way because we anticipated the expenditures to go up slightly. And then down at the bottom, you'll see those other financing sources. Those are what our transfer ins and outs are. And we had a more recent request to better define those. So at the very bottom, we put a little box in there. It's a transfer key so that you could see more of a definition of how those are defined and where they come from. That's just another source for you to look at to see if you don't understand. And please, if you don't, call me and ask me. I will help you out, no problem. So Melissa, could you scroll back up to the other financing sources, please? Thank you. So here's what I was talking about, your convention center. That's the money that the general fund transfers out to the convention center to help offset their losses. The same thing for the public safety fund. You can see where we're at there. We also transfer the amount of code enforcement. We moved some of the code enforcement out of planning last year down to police, and the general fund accounts for that. So that's what that line takes care of as well. So at the end result, as of right now, the unreserved fund balance for the general fund is 6.7 million. Keep in mind, most of what we just talked about is operating expense, and the unreserved fund balance is more for one-time expenditures or natural disasters or occurrences that cannot be predicted, okay? So we'll move on. I'm going to touch on the public safety fund very quickly because we have a special line item on the agenda for that. But here's another picture, public safety fund. This is all of them grouped together. We have since split them out, and I will address that on that agenda item. So we are at 1.7 million of revenues versus 1.8 last year at this time, 1.89 the year prior to that. So your expenditures are at 3.3 million versus 3.5 and then 3.9. And then keep in mind in 2019 we bought that fire truck, and that'll be included in the 3.9. So that's one of those caveats that I talked about that you can pull out, so for trending purposes. Keep going down, and then the other financing sources, you'll see what comes into the public safety fund versus what is going out. Again, the amounts, the ones that you see coming in are all from the general fund to subsidize, and then the ones going out are to the internal service fund. They have their own internal service funds to kind of save up for equipment that's needed in the future and equipment replacement and those kind of things. That $500,000 was earmarked for the fire department for this year. So you can see that. Their unreserved fund balance, again, is 6.1. Keep in mind for a later discussion, the unreserved fund balance is what I just said is for one-time expenditures natural disasters or occurrences. So keep that in mind when we talk about that in just a little bit. I'm trying to do this thing, sorry. Okay, can you scroll down a little bit? This is Convention Center. The Convention Center is at $869,000 revenue versus last year's $959, and the year before that, $1.5 million, a little bit more than that. And you can see that, and the Convention Center really took a hit last year. Most convention centers closed. They lost a lot of reservations, and they took a large hit. So you're gonna see that, and just keep that in mind when we talk about their financially, those kind of things. Their expenditures right now are at a little more than 1.2 million. 2020s, they were at 1.3, and 2019, a little more than 1.7. And then we'll go down to they also have another financing sources, transfer ins, transfer outs. And you can see that we budget an amount through the general fund to kind of try to balance them out. They'll present their losses or what they've assumed their losses were gonna be to us, and then we try to budget those in the general fund to offset their losses. So that's where that $316,000 is coming from. And then the operating transfer in from tourism is for specific marketing reimbursement to them. And they get $500,000 of that every year. And they are, I will tell you, in the past, they haven't used very much of that. And so they are really trying to do a much better job of promoting and marketing and all those things to try to up the convention center. So that's where that comes from. The other way to check us on these financials is also, you notice operating transfer in from general fund, operating transfer in from tourism. You should be able to go to those other two funds and see an operating transfer out in the same dollar amount. So if you really want to do a really detailed review and check us, I'm trying to give you some ways to help you do that. Okay, so scroll on up, please. This one is the tourism sales tax. Again, this is off of admissions, lodging, entertainment type venues. We get a 4% and a 0.5% on food and beverage here. That's where those taxes are. We're at 3.1 million this year versus 1.9. And we have the interest income. And so our total revenues are up by 3.1 million versus 1.9 last year and 2.5 the year before. You want to go to expenditures? This is, you can see most of this, the tourism line that you see in the expenditures, a majority, if not all of that, goes to the Branson Convention Center. And we set a budget for them, and then what happens with them is that they turn in their receipts at given times. We go through, we audit it for the reimbursement for the marketing purposes in our contract that we said we would, and then we turn around and cut a check to them for that reimbursement. Yes, sir.
You didn't mean the convention center.
Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I didn't. I meant the chamber. Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry. I will restate that. The chamber marketing monies that we give to them. So, and then you see the debt service principal and then the interest. And this is what I was talking about. 1.8 million that we have already paid out, and you will see in January the 2nd of 2022, we'll make our final payment on that debt issue, and then the tourism tax, with exception to the certificate of participation debt that we took out for the 12 million, all the other bonding debt will be gone out of the tourism in January 2nd of 2022. So that's quite an achievement. We're happy for that for the city. Okay, so the other financing sources, again, transfer ins, transfer outs. You can see most of these are self-explanatory. The transfer in from the Highway 76 CID, I will address that because they have, through the whole 76 project, they agreed, the CID board agreed that 9.2 million of those should have come from the CID funds, and so we have a contract for them to pay us back over time. That 500,000 is money that they are paying back and drawing down that 9.2 million, and we've divided that by 12, and we move that money on a monthly basis. So you'll see that 500,000 total coming in. So that's what that is. Okay, and then really quick, that operating transfer out to TIF. We've already spoken on that, but that's the new TIF and we have to be really careful about how we present that and show that. But that is also the money going out to that new TIF. It's a 50%, okay?
Is that the reason, back on the public safety fund, there was a new, so it's related to this same new TIF?
It is, and it's a pay-as-you-go TIF, and so just a little bit of background on that. It was up to and not to exceed $7 million. And when the TIF was going through, we had a TIF commission, and then the board had to do final approval on that. And they gave us a list of all the categories that they were going to spend and a budget for all of those categories. And so what the finance department has to do is we take those monies that we get in from all the reports from the state, and we have to look at the 50%, and then when they turn in the receipts to us, we go through them and we certify them back to the categories that were approved. And I think they're a little less than $5 million of certified costs to this date right now that they've got in. So the monies that come in, 50% of it stays for the general fund, and then 50% of it, depending on where the taxes lie, and then 50% of it goes out to that special fund to account for that certification of the $7 million. And you'll see it on tourism, you probably see it on public safety, you'll see it on all the taxes, because the taxes are captured. Even the CID, 50% of their 1% is captured as well. I said that really fast, but did that answer your question? You're welcome. Okay, so there's the transportation sales tax. Again, 0.5%, and they're at 1.8 million versus 1,895,000. And I mean, they're staying pretty consistent with their revenues. You can see that. If you'll scroll down a little bit. One thing to note is those taxes, there's more than in the transportation, there's more than just that 0.5% tax in there. So if you say, why aren't they changing as much? We get a motor vehicle tax in there as well, so that'll be grouped in with that. Okay, so then you get, here's the expenditures for the transportation. It's really the garage, the streets, and the MS4 stormwater. So you can see those are the expenditures, $851,000 versus $789,000 from last year and $872 the year before. And you want to, and again, here's your transfer ins and your transfer outs, and there's debt, the TIF debt, you can see that. And then at the end, we put a transfer key so that you can better understand what those ins and outs mean. Okay? And they're at a $3.5 million reserve. And then if you, just some of the newer ones, the reserve, many of these funds have a 20% of operating expenditure reserve that is required by code. So transportation, tourism, water, sewer are all 20% of operating expenditures. I'm sorry, not transportation, general fund. But we still maintain a 20% in the transportation fund too, although it's not stated in code. But the Parks and Rec is a 10% reserve rather than a 20%. And that is of your total operating expenditures. Okay, we'll keep moving. I'm trying to move very quickly, but please stop me and ask me if I say something that you don't understand or you have questions about. And that is, this one is your total debt service fund. This wraps up all your TIF funds. This one does. So 162. 162 is the TIF Aquarium, 165 is the Branson Landing, 170 is your Branson Hills TIF, and 171 is also a Branson Landing, but it's IDA. Different group that issued the debt, that's all that means. Okay, and then your revenues here are 4.6 million versus 5.3 the year before and 5.6 the previous year. And then your expenditures, if you'll scroll down. Okay, you got 172 here, and that 110,903 that you see that's new, that's different, and it's non-departmental in your debt. That is us paying out that certification for that new TIF. Okay?
Jamie, would you just briefly explain to the new folks why it's not, I mean, not that we're screaming or yelling, but the reason with the landing TIF, the reduction in the business type?
Certainly. So you all have been out to the landing. Landing is a great part of our city, and it's a really good, stable what do I say, benchmark at one end, okay? So, but what's happening over the past years is, if you'll notice, that a lot of the retail sales, retail stores have been moved out, and a lot of entertainment venues have gone in. Good or bad, that's for anybody's own personal opinion. However, it changes our tax structure. Okay, so we don't get retail sales on the entertainment venues, but we do get tourism. So it'll just change. You'll start to see a shift as far as that goes in the landing. Probably a decline in the retail sales tax, but you'll see an increase in the tourism sales tax on that. Is that what you were anticipating? And it's just a change in how it's structured and how we can handle it.
I just wanted to understand that, and also that with the more restaurants, you also have the reduced tax.
That's true, too. And the more restaurants, we only get a half cent for the food and beverage, so you can keep that in mind as well.
Tanger will stay full for your retail.
Although, you know, coffee shops and stuff wouldn't hurt out there. Okay, so that's just a little bit of explanation, and I will offer this to anyone. Some of you have been on it a while. Please come in and talk to me, and we'll set aside a time, and I will talk through all of this stuff. It's a lot for us to try to get into one meeting, but the more you understand it, I think things will start to really flow and help make better decisions and stuff when you really start to understand. And then priority-based budgeting, that's exciting, and that's coming this summer, and this committee will have a really big role in that one as well. I think it's exciting. Y'all may not, but I do. Okay. So we'll keep moving. This is just one of the debt issues here, the debt service fund. It's a 160, used to be the Branson Meadows TIF. That TIF went away, so now we still capture that money and put it in here because there's still a debt service issue against it. Okay, so we still operate the exact same as we used to with the TIF, so that we have the money to pay that debt. You want to scroll up? This is your capital project fund in a year where we have a lot of capital projects. Unfortunately, last year we had to cancel those capital projects due to COVID, and this year we did not budget a whole lot of capital projects. Now, one thing I will say is, we've said many, many times over, but I'm going to state it again, that in July, after our audit is presented, after June 30th, we're going to do a mid-year finance level review. And my hope is that by the end of July, we will have the financial presented and then the recommendations to release some of that, so that the departments can have some of their priority capital items left. That's my hope. So we'll have a little bit better of the numbers, a little bit better idea of the year that's ahead of us, and what we can release and what we can spend. And we will probably bring it to this committee prior to taking it out, just so that y'all can have question and answer. So we might have to set a special meeting for this committee, because we're gonna go through priority-based budgeting and budget all at the same time, plus this mid-level year review. So we might need to have more than just one meeting in that month.
The good news is she usually buys us bagels.
Yes. Or if we want to reduce our carbs and sugar, we can go a different route. Just saying. Okay. Okay, so the next one is the Parks and Rec Fund. We can scroll up. There doesn't really anything happening in that fund. Parks and Rec Fund, this one is a good picture to look at too. Your revenues are $533 this year versus $244 last year. And you will notice the campground, I think there was like 191% occupancy increase, I believe, and a large percent on their reservations as well. So they're doing really well on that. So I want to always pick that out. And then the ball programs, you can see the difference, 91,000 this year versus 11,000 last year. So you can see that it looks like, and it appears based off the numbers, that Parks and Rec are coming back full force. And we hope that it stays that way. Pending no floods, that would be awesome.
Stop the rain.
Yes, yes.
Who has that power?
I know who.
Make a call.
Okay, so the expenditures here, you'll see are 687 versus 593 from last year, and you will see the Recplex is a little bit higher in expenditures. But I will tell you that if you look at the comparison of the revenue growth versus the expenditures, they've still done a really good job of keeping their expenditures low because this year is kind of an anomaly and an uncertain one. So I think all the departments have done a good job, but I always highlight Parks and Rec because they have so very little to deal with, and they just really do a good job. Okay, if you want to scroll up. Other financing sources, that general fund, that 750, that's their subsidy from the general fund. So you can look for that. Also, the landscape, I'm going to speak to that a little bit later, but they took on the trees and the landscaping for the city, and you're going to see a budget amendment that we're going to bring before the board a little bit later to increase the budget because of some of the trees and some of the needs there. So right now, they're sitting at an unreserved fund balance of $995,000. Once the audit's done here, and I say this almost every year, but excess over like 20% for them, they only have to keep a 10% reserve of operating expenditures. What I like to do is to recommend that we move some of their excess in their reserve to their internal service fund because they always have those needs. They always have HVAC needs and those kind of things. And the more they can build up their equipment fund, the more they can be at ease with some of those repairs that just happen and they don't have to stress out about where that money's coming from. So that's always a good thing. That's kind of what we like to really see that happen. Okay, if you want to scroll that, keep going. Just keep going to the water sewer. This is just a combination of all those funds. So just keep going to water sewer. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to move very quickly. This is your water sewer revenues. They're at a little more than 3 million versus last year we're at 2.6 and the year before we're at 2.4. You will see the consumption reports that we have added into your packet. The consumption is up this year. Last year, I will tell you this, they got hit pretty hard with their consumption and those kind of things. So keep in mind as we go throughout the year. And then you will see on 2020, you see that 237,000 versus this year it's 10,000. That's your revenue categories. That 237,000 was FEMA money that we got in 2020 for the 2017 flood. So it's kind of a gauge at how long FEMA money takes to get back. We always have to pay it out and we go through and we apply for it and stuff, but we'll always try to pick those out for you so that you know what they are, okay? And if you want to scroll down to the expenditures, these are all their operating expenditures, and you will notice that it is set up a little bit differently, and that is what I spoke to about proprietary versus government. We have to set it up in this manner. This is how most businesses will typically see it. They'll see depreciation, probably contra expenses. You'll see it set up as personal, contract, commodities, debt service, those things versus departments in the other governmental funds. Okay, so at 3.9 million for expenditures versus 3.8 last year and 3.7 the prior year. So, and then you also have your transfer ins and you transfer outs down there as well. And that transfer out to the transportation fund, that is for like when water sewer pipes bust and stuff and tear up somebody's parking lot or tear up the streets or something. That transportation, the public works guys have to go out and fix it, and that's to assist them in the repairs and the items that they need to do those repairs. So the unreserved fund balance is 65 million in the water sewer, but I want to make sure that you look at your balance sheet on this because a majority of that 65 million is wrapped up in assets. Those are assets. And so cash, they have about 6 million in cash with some obligations wrapped up into that 6 million. So really, we always do a separate, so they have about a little less than 4 million actual spendable dollars, okay? So really pay attention to the balance sheet on this one, and if you want any other numbers around the budget time, at the end of their budget worksheet, we always break that out at the very bottom for you so that you can see cash available. And it's also in the comprehensive annual financial report that we present at audit time, and you'll see that as well. Okay, the rest of them are just the internal service funds that we have transferred money into, and those are equipment funds that we're trying to build up so that they can do replacement costs, they can do replacement funds and not really have to mess with their operation budget on that purpose, okay? So then that's that, and I will keep quickly moving on. Which one's next? The cash by fund report, Melissa? So if you'll go into that one, I'll explain this one. We always refer to this as our Bob Simmons report. And we do that because back when I first started, back in 2008, he says, Jamie, is there a way for us to tie all of that money and the reserves and stuff back to actual bank statements so we can know that what you're reporting to us, there's money in the bank for that. So we presented him this. So we have this, the way we have it is set up is the first one you'll see general funds, safety, transportation, all of this is in one bank account. And so that's what all of the funds that are wrapped up in one bank account have, and that's their cash balance. Then if you go to the balance sheet, you'll see that the balance sheets are all accounted for, but you'll see those cash amounts on that balance sheet, okay? And then down below, it talks about the account balance. We have some of it wrapped up in investments. And as I said earlier this week, we keep about $7 million or less in central bank, and the rest of it we try to move to investments to have higher earnings there. Okay, so that's really, you want to look at that difference, and you want it to say zero down at the bottom. And then we have one for the public safety fund. We also have one for the tourism fund because those are separate bank accounts, okay? And that's why we do it the way we do it. And then the next report is for the balance sheet, and I've kind of addressed that. You see the 7.112, you'll go back to that cash by fund report and see that there's $7,112,845 in that, and that makes it part of that balance. So that's what that is for, okay? So there is the financial reports in a nutshell. I went through it really, really fast. I was trying to give some explanation in detail, but again, I will offer out to anybody that wants to have more learning on this. I am available, and we will make ourselves available to give further explanation if needed. No problem. Okay? You want to, the next reports, I believe, are the information reports, if you want to click on that real quick. We started putting these in here, I believe, at the beginning of this year. These are just for informational purposes because we do more than just finance. We also do the water sewer billings. We're over that. We also do the business licenses, liquor licenses. We do the tourism tax reconciliations, all of those kind of things. They all mesh together because one has something to do with something else. And when we give business licenses, we have to check balances and stuff. And if they owe, we can't give the license, so on and so forth. And so much of it's wrapped up with each other. And that's why we're presenting this so that you can see. Here's the new businesses, here's businesses renewed. That transfer column is sometimes in the system, it'll account for a new business, but it's really a transfer of ownership or address. And so that's why we give you that column as well. It's just good information to have if you want it. If not, it's just really for informational purposes. The next one is procurement. The procurement is also capital and operational procurement is also in our office, and so we like to just give you all of the biddings and what's gone out in this year so that you can see what all has taken place so far. And then the next one is the consumption reports, the water sewer consumption reports, and I've used these for a long time, but these will help you gauge the differences when we give you the water sewer financial reports and what's going on and how that is tracked and how we can do some analytics there as well. And that is those informational reports. You want to go to the next one, please? The next one, item number 3, specifically speaks to public safety, and we've had a lot of conversation and really we've had a lot of requests to highlight the public safety, so that's kind of what we're trying to do when we talk about this. So I'm going to explain this graph just a little bit. Can you zoom in on the graph, because I'll explain the assumptions, yeah. Okay, so this graph from the start of the Public Safety Fund going forward. I will speak right now that this is not a good looking graph. I mean, I think the graph looks good, but the outcome of the graph does not look good. And so I need to highlight this. I'm going to go over the assumptions that are built in this graph. Obviously, it's actual to current. And then going forward, here's the assumptions that we have put in the graph. We have put a 1% tax growth. There's a 1% tax growth in 2022, but most of these assumptions we built out from 23 going forward, because that's when we are assuming that the debt service for the buildings will start, okay? So it's just a picture in time, but here's the assumptions that are wrapped up into this graph so you'll have some idea of what we're up against, okay? For revenue, you have a 1% tax growth beginning in 2023, which 1% of a tax growth is only $56,981, not much. But if you think about it that way, if you think, oh no, we're gonna grow at 3%, well, that's only $170,000. So between 1% and 3% is not a whole lot of additional revenue. And if you go back and you look at the transportation tax, which mirrors the public safety tax, 0.5%, the highest amount of growth we've had is 3%. Okay, so you can gauge it that way. But for now, for conservative purposes, we have a 1% tax growth built in here, okay? We also, beginning in 23, we made the subsidy from the general fund whole, which means they're back up to the $7.6 million in this graph we assumed as of 2023. Okay, so we added more revenue to them. The 911 revenue, that's the 911 tax, that has been declining. We got a little bit more than 100,000, but we kept it at 100,000 flat revenue because we're not sure when and if that will come, and it's really not a stable source of income.
Just to elaborate on that a little bit, Jeff sits on the board. There's been, I still don't agree with, right now the tax is only collected on landline telephones. It's not collected on cell phones. My comment when I was on the board, and I know Jeff has carried this forward, is that the state has now allowed us, we can either do landlines or we can do cell phones. I don't know about you all. I know I've got 4 daughters, myself, my wife. We all have our own cell phone, and that tax could be collected on each one of those cell phones. That would increase that 911 rate, but for some reason the county has been unwilling to do that, just so you're aware.
So growth in interest income we kept at 1%, and a growth in the fees and the permits we kept at 1%. Now the larger growth you'll see in expenditures, and anybody can say, well, if you keep your revenues at 1% and your expenditures grow at 5%, eventually this graph is going to come into fruition. Yes, that's true, and yes, that's true. What I mean by that is the expenditures are growing at a much more rapid pace than the revenues are. And so then you have decisions to make, okay? So the green line represents your revenues and the red line represents your expenditures. So obviously you can see the trend in this growth. It didn't work. So the growth of 5% wages and benefits beginning in 2023, that's pretty realistic based on history of growth of wages and benefits. And that's not just us, I will tell you, that's pretty much a trend all the way across the board. Growth of 3% in the majority of expenditures, contractual commodities, those kind of things. We kept them at a growth of 3%. That's built into this graph. We also did a debt service, and so we went in and we did the debt service at $13 million. We assumed, this is our assumptions, $3 million for fire and $10 million for police, and that's for their buildings, okay? We assume that's including FF&E and those kind of things. But a $13 million debt service to begin in 2023, going out 20 years, is approximately about $915,000 annually at a 2.53% interest. Okay, and we sent that to our financial advisor and just said, hey, can you look this over? He sent it back, he tweaked the interest going forward. That's current. That may change, okay? But what we're telling you is that the debt service is included at beginning in 2023, okay? Also beginning in 2023, we added $1.2 million because when we get that fire station built, we have to have the fire employees in order to be able to man that fire station. So what we were being told by the fire department is they need 12. So 12 at about $100,000 a piece is $1.2 million. So that assumption is in there in 2023. Okay, and then you've got, what we did is we did a internal service fund transfer of $350,000 for the fire trucks, and that also is gonna grow at 3%. So we assumed transferring money out of fire. We also assumed transferring money out of police at $250,000 for their vehicles, growing at 3%. And we also added $100,000 capital for both police and fire, because they have capital. It's a realistic item, and both of them need money for capital. So we assumed $100,000 for police, $100,000 for fire, for their capital needs, plus their internal service fund transfers. And the capital, we did not do a growth on because it was already pretty bad. So what we're trying to show you here is that based on those assumptions, and I will tell you, those assumptions are pretty conservative assumptions. So based on the conservative assumptions that we've created, this is a picture of the public safety sales tax. Now, there's all kinds of things that we might can adjust, but this is just factual. It's not for me to say what we adjust. It is for all of you that are over me to say what we adjust. And so I wanted to bring this picture before you so that you could see there's some hard decisions that probably need to be made. What do we do? Because this picture is not a sustainable picture based on these assumptions. So based on the financial presentation that we just did, and on this graph, we'll continue to show you this over and over and over for as long as it takes to really say, okay, we've got to make some different decisions or better decisions when it comes to police and fire. And I will tell you that we split the financials out. We did it on a weighted average based on history. So I believe it's a 55% and a 45%, give or take. Right now, I think 55% is police, 45% is fire. And you'll see, I have it. Hang on, I'll tell you real quick. Okay, so the fire department, as of the end of April, they have about a $2.9 million reserve, and the police has a almost $2 million reserve. Okay, so we split those out, and we're going to continue to split them out. And going forward, you'll start to see that in your packets as well. You'll see the summary, because we have to report it as a summary, one public safety fund, because it's one special revenue. But we split it out internally so that everybody could see the differences, okay? But at the end of the year, when we report the comprehensive annual financial report and the auditors do their presentation, all of that rolls up into one public safety fund. So just keep that in mind as well. And so that's what this graph is for. And you've seen all the financials. So we just wanted to share that with you today. We've had some questions over it, and we thought, well, we're just going to bring it and let you ask any and all questions that you want to in regards to public safety. Really, that's my report on the public safety. Separate agenda. Do you have any questions that maybe we can answer? Yes, sir.
Jamie, it's my recollection that most of the fire engines are exceeding the 10-year life. And does that incorporate that, replacing those engines in that curve you have there?
That $350,000 for the internal service fund transfer that we built in, that was the assumption of we're going to put money in there to try to build up for a replacement schedule for those fire trucks. That's what that was for. So the answer, in my opinion, is yes, that $350,000 should build. And I think every 3 to 5 years, $350,000 building at a 3% growth over time, that should help take care of the fire trucks. The $500,000 that we put in this year was for that purpose as well, to really kickstart their internal service fund so that they could turn around. And maybe by the end of this year, we could do like a 3-year lease financing or something at a very low rate to help start that off.
Yeah, that was my nexus to the next question on police cars, because they've all been the leases, and you figured that out already.
Yes, and so what we do with those leases, the enterprise lease has been, from the finance department's perspective, excellent for us. Because what we do is when we budget for these new cars, we budget the entire cost of the car, so out of operations. So then what we do is we move that entire cost of the car out of their police public safety fund into their internal service fund, and then we manage out of their internal service fund the lease payments for the 3 or 5 years, so that it doesn't hit their operations every year. It hits their operations, they've got it budgeted, a brand-new car for 1 year. For the first year of operations, we move it out, and we manage it on the side so they don't have to worry about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did that answer your question?
Clearly.
Okay.
So Jamie, this is concerning that when we look at this. And so I would think we're probably already behind the 8 ball in addressing this because 2023 will be here before we know it. Will you be providing, I know you don't tell us what we need to do, but will you be providing recommendations based on whatever information you can gather, maybe from other cities or whatever, on some actions that we need to take to change the trajectory of these, these lines on this page?
I'm sure the leadership team, the chiefs, myself, the Stan and John, the leadership, yeah, we'll get together and we're going to discuss those options and what we have to do, and certainly bring, I'm sure, recommendations back before this committee and most likely the board too. So it's not just me, because I come at it at a financial perspective, but these guys are the ones that run the operations, and they can tell you a little bit more about how that's going to go, but I'm sure we will do that.
Jamie, first of all, thank you very much for this, because it's extremely meaningful for me. I can't speak for the other members here, but this has always been on my mind. And I know that this meeting isn't going to specifically address it, but it puts it on the radar. And as we move into the upcoming meetings, we need to be mindful of this in every decision that we make, because the only way to change that trajectory is by really digging into all the numbers and making sure that we're thinking about 2030 and not 2022. Again, thank you for this graph.
And you know, like I said, those are all based on the assumptions that I gave you, but I assumed we were going at it at a conservative assumption. Now, the taxes could grow, but remember, if they grow at 3%, that's not much more revenue. It's not going to account for that. So we got to come up with unique ideas of ways to fix this, yeah.
The real answer is we've got to look at both sides of the coin, not just one. And that's not just revenues, but expenses as well. And while we always look at revenues, and we always try to find different ways, it seems that people kind of forget that we are subject to inflation as well. It also, we're also subject to some issues that are beyond our control, like the Social Security office calling me to tell me that I have a security leak on my Social Security number. But we get given mandates that are incumbent upon the police department, the fire department, to provide services for certain things and do certain things that they don't come along with funding. Another thing that most people don't realize is that police and firemen, their loggers rate is higher than a general employee, because their retirement can come much earlier because of this wear and tear and stress and the things that they go through. So we just have to come up with a proper balance between the two of them. Fortunately, and I say this, one of the things that we had to move forward with a little quicker than we wanted to in fire was going ahead and hiring a new inspector for them. Unfortunately, we had 3 firemen that were already on the payroll that were there on a grant, but the grant was expiring and we had to take that money. If we would not have gotten the public safety sales tax, we would have probably lost those 3 firemen, which we don't want to do. It's why we haven't hired the 12 yet until we get the building started. We hoped to have the building ready to go by this time, the plans anyway, ready to go for the fire station by this time, but COVID walked up and smacked us. Now we're going to smack COVID back, but anyway, it's an ongoing process. It can't be a knee-jerk reaction. We've got to honestly sit down and think through this. to make sure that we're providing the services that the community deserves and to make sure that we're keeping the police and fire departments solvent while not attacking the general fund, because that's the only place we really have to take any money from, which is already burdened.
Just to give you an idea on loggers, the police loggers rate is about 16.7% versus the general employee is about 13.9. That's a picture of exactly what he was talking about, how much higher it is. And that's not something really we can control. So those are all things that you have to assume. And I will speak to this too. Typically in a public safety, typically in a special revenue fund, there's other expenses that are accounted for because it's a special revenue. You need to make sure you capture all the expenditures that it takes to run that department, along with all the revenues, because what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to show a true and real picture. But there's a lot of expenditures that we're not able to capture in the public safety fund because simply they just can't afford it. And so you won't see those expenditures. There's no administrative fees for the stuff all the other departments do. And typically you see administrative fees in these special revenue funds. Some things like their cell phones, also some things like their vehicles and the fuel and all of that. They're not paying for those kind of things out of their special revenue fund because they just simply can't afford it. So when you're thinking about that, those numbers are not wrapped up in this too. So if we were truly able to capture those expenditures like we're supposed to, that picture would look a lot worse because that's a little bit, all the expenditures that should be is a little bit more than $1 million. And then you grow that at 3% over time. You can get an idea of how that picture's going. But we wanted to show you what currently was happening based on our assumptions, how it works, so that it wasn't just us, the employees, the staff seeing it, and we talk about it all the time, but I wanted to make sure you all got a clear picture of what was going on. Okay, is there any more questions related to that? And if not, we can move on. Okay. And this is just the review of our disbursements. Is this? Okay, yeah. This is just a review of our disbursements, and we will need an emotion on this one.
I'll make a motion to accept it.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any other questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. The next thing I think is budget amendments. Yes. Okay, so we've had to do some budget amendments already this year, and we will continue to as a result of things not being able to be budgeted because of the uncertainty of this year, but things that simply have to be taken care of. And so you will see that this next one is for Parks and Rec, and it was based off of tree trimming and what I talked about, that they had some tree trimming issues and some trees for the North Beach Park. I've got Cindy here in case you want to ask her any questions regarding this. But they need to increase the contractual amount to $32,000. But our budget amendment, and this is my recommendation, typically in the past for that line item, we've held it at $50,000 because there's so much unknown there. And it is a pass-through because there's a tree fund, and that tree fund comes from the $50 per tree, those kind of things. So I'm going to bring a budget amendment before the Board of Aldermen in the amount to raise that line item back up to $50,000. The Parks and Rec took this over from the Planning Department, and they are very conservative in nature, and when they budgeted it very conservatively, but things just happened. And that's the intent of doing budget amendments throughout the year anyway. So I'm going to make a recommendation, although they're going to increase their contract to $32,000 before the board. They're going to ask for that. I'm going to ask for the budget amendment to be $50,000 because that's historically where we've left it. Some years we've used it, some years we haven't, but just so they have it in the event that they need it this year it'll be there for them. So that's the budget amendment that I am going to bring before the board to make recommendations, although that they need to increase this contract for right now, currently, to $32,000. And right now, the budget amendments, we really like to bring them before this committee, just so that y'all have the information ahead of time before it comes to the board because of the finance and the capital-related items. Is there any questions on that whatsoever? Okay, so we will move on to the next one. Melissa, I forget, we just need, do we need anything on the budget amendments?
No, they just review them. They don't have to actually
That's
vote
what I
on them.
thought, okay, thank you. The next one is regarding the Wi-Fi access points for the campground. I don't know when this one is going to be coming to the board. I believe we took it off of the board agenda, or did we? I'm still telling you about it because we are still gonna do a budget amendment for it.
Sure. So we hope to bring this to you in June as a budget amendment. Right now, as Jamie said, this is kind of an informational thing, and we have the money in our internal service fund, sorry. But Chad and I are working through that with Tingo, and we're still waiting on some numbers. So Chad, I think we're thinking June 22nd to bring it to the board for consideration.
Correct, yeah, tentatively, correct.
Be happy to answer any questions if you. It's 18,000. Yeah. What? So just, if you camp, you better have Wi-Fi. Let me tell you, it's not back to woods camping anymore. And so what you're seeing is a picture of our campground, all the sites, it's an overview, and Chad's where the access points are where you can get Wi-Fi from. So.
Right. So currently we have, what is it,
Seven.
seven access points at the park. These were put in place about a little over 5 years ago. And of
2016,
course,
I think.
Technology moves at a rapid pace, and that's quite some time, and these are outdoors. And at the time, it greatly improved things. However, Cindy can speak to more modern, we'll call them COVID campers that come to this park and expect very, very good Wi-Fi. And
Or hence known as millennials.
and so what we're proposing or requesting is 4 additional access points to be installed. One here, simulated AP2, well, I'm sorry, one, if you can see my mouse right here. I don't have a laser pointer up here, but. I have my laser pointer. So one here, over to the far left, and then up kind of in the middle, and then one over here to the right. And so what this will do is provide improved coverage for the park, and, you know, even in the last 5 years, for a lot of us, it used to be there'd be, 2 or 3 at the most wireless products per RV. I mean, you might have 10 in these today. I mean, it's really drastically going up. In addition to that, providing Wi-Fi in an RV park is drastically different than, say, a home, because they're made out of aluminum and metal, and it refracts wireless signals. And so we're trying to get ahead of the curve here and put in a quality product that will meet our customers' needs. Any questions from that perspective? I would also note that.
How many parking spaces, how many campsites do you have
It's
there?
100 and, wow, used to be 160 at some point, and then we've downsized because we've had to make that bigger and bigger. I think it's 130 right now, but I'm
I believe
not
that's
sure.
right. I believe that's right, around 130.
It's 130.
Yeah, on the front row,
I remember when you done that.
and the super sites, yeah, we're combining. And we really like to do that on the back row of Raleigh too, because there's such a high demand for, RVs are bigger and bigger.
I say that's a lot of camp spots to cover with the limited access that you have right now.
Yeah, and I think the original, design was probably, a couple of devices? And the gal from Tango said the other day, they make the assumptions like 8 devices.
Yeah, it's substantially increased. In addition to this, budget amendment, it's not just these 4 access points that we're upgrading, it's the bridges that operate. Each of these devices that you see right here have what's called an access point on them, and then what's also called a bridge. And that's the wireless signal that travels back to the old main office right here. And so it's the backhaul, so to speak, of the wireless to get to where we actually bring the internet into the park. So without getting overly technical, it's not just for random access points that we're upgrading. It's actually the whole back-end infrastructure of the wireless network. If that
Chad,
makes sense.
what's our broadband actual speed to that side?
We've currently have cable modem down there that's 400 download and I want to say 40 upload. And that's just it's
adequate for,
It's adequate for what we're doing.
Right.
Yes.
So
I'd like to see that upload speed increased, but
Right.
It's substantially more expensive
Right.
to get those kinds of speeds on fiber down
we're tied contractually already, aren't we?
there. No, not in that instance, not with
Oh, I thought
cable.
we were.
We have contractual obligations with other fiber across the city.
Okay, but not this one?
But not that one.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Really, what they're looking for long-term, our long-term plan is to run something to each box and move away from cable in the future and allocate those funds to something more substantial to stream. That's what we're thinking, Chad, what we talked about?
That's the long term.
Long-term,
And to be clear, this isn't going to quite get us there.
yeah.
But this is going to, hopefully bridge that gap and provide much improved service in the meantime.
This is gonna keep people from calling and complaining so much.
Yes, I hope so. I mean, we still get good reviews, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's a rapidly changing thing.
It's frustrating when you're somewhere and you need access to your devices, so.
It is.
Anyway, I would say with the increased revenue that the campground has seen, I know we're not voting on it, but I would think this is a great idea, so.
Cindy and I like to joke that you don't come to this campground to go to the wilderness. I mean, people are coming here not because they want to be in the wild, so.
I like to find those places to go where I can't get cell service. Nobody can find me, but I guess some people do.
Come to my house.
And keep in mind, too, there is what is called the American Rescue Plan, where there's all this money out there, and broadband, those kind of things is specifically addressed in that. So we're hopeful that we can get some of that and capture some of that to help the IT department with some of that items. Okay, so the next one. Okay, this is for the fire department projects, and I will just add right up at the top, both of these contracts have already been taken to the Board of Aldermen on first reading. However, we've got to find the money to account for those two contracts, so that's what we're doing right now. These are budget amendments to cover, in total, it's $76,000 that's needed for this equipment. I think it was $55,000 for the first contract, not to exceed for the compressor, and $21,000 for the testers, the mass fit, and the spare bottles of not to exceed. I know that one was just taken like Tuesday. So you'll see the consent, the final reads on those coming up, but I will need to take the budget amendment to the Board of Aldermen so that we can get the budget adjusted in order to account for the payments of those things. And so that's what those are. So we just really want to make sure that any budget amendment that we do comes before you all so that you all can vet them and we can have that discussion over them, and then it goes to the board. Is there any questions on that one? I know that's kind of already been talked about, but I just wanted to run over that with y'all as well. Okay, we can move on. I believe the project status report's next. And this project status report, really, this report was created to the major large capital items that were going on, the projects, the Highway 76, the downtown reconstruction. This report was created so that we can show you all what we deal with and what we were going through, all the staff, not just our department. So you have the downtown, this will track any and all additions that were added to by a monthly basis, and we bring this report to you all, even though it doesn't change a lot right now because those projects are on hold. We still want to bring it before you and show you from start to finish where it came from. So that's what we're doing right now. As of the date, Melissa, can you scroll up just a tad? Oh, maybe down. I meant down, sorry. You can see that the water sewer, that was a piece of the Highway 76, and that was the water mains. And then the other operational pieces of the 76 were right up there. So for the 76 altogether, you can see where that lies. And it was 22.9 million. And then the downtown was also up there as well. And really, once those projects get up and running again, this report will be more fluent and you will want to pay special and close attention to that report, okay? So that's coming as well. And then really, if you don't have any questions, that's the next item is the director's report. And there's one thing I wanted to discuss with you regarding the convention center. Can I move forward? Are we good to move forward to that item? Okay. So that they have basically what I call an emergency purchase, and it's their air conditioning. And they're really in need of about almost $11,000 to repair that. It's getting hot outside. It's getting hot in that building. And so we have a capital reserve account that we share. So the contract basically says they put in 4% of their revenue on a monthly basis into this capital account. And then this committee, it's brought before this committee so that they can use that money. So that kind of gives them accountability on that specific set-aside capital monies there. But they need to be able to use that. What they're doing is they're going to spend it out of their operations and then upon approval, reimburse it back from that capital reserve amount. So I can't remember, and I will get this to you if you don't know. How much is in their capital reserve right now? Okay, I was going to say more than 200, so that is, they have more than 200,000 because they had to draw that account down a little bit, do you recall, as a result of the pandemic, and they set it at a minimum of 200,000. They have since then started building it back up. But with that being said, they have well more than 200,000, and they're needing 11,000 to get this fixed pretty quickly before the summer gets into full swing so that it doesn't hurt their business. So what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Do you need a motion or just?
No, it's really just for informational purposes because it's just per contract, it comes before this. And then just so that y'all are aware of why that capital reserve is being drawn down, that's kind of how the contract is set up. But usually if discussion needed, there's discussion on that. But I will say considered that an emergency purchase, especially when the summer's fixing to start getting hot. And it's getting hot in that building.
Well, and right now, HVAC units are 4 to 6 weeks out for manufacturing,
Yes.
so.
I met with Sam yesterday, actually, and we discussed this issue. And so the way he explained it to me was there's basically two systems. And so there's one that operates, and then if the temperature outside gets above, I think 85 degrees, there's sort of this backup system. And without that kicking on, they can't cool that building. And it's this backup system that's I guess not functioning at all right now. And so, he shared with me that this was very important. And so, yeah, it sounds like something that needs to happen pretty quickly.
We need to approve that. We need to.
Thank you, and we'll let him know, and then when the reimbursement comes back before us, I'll bring it back before you all again so that you can see the final actual cost. But I told him I didn't think it was going to be a big problem, but we needed to make sure and go through the right process and have this discussion as a group. So, yes, sir?
Jamie, I'm supportive of this, but I'm curious if contractually there's a percentage that we can't go below, or that they can't go below under that contract.
No, not contractually. Really, that piece deals with the percent of revenue. We started off at 2% of the monthly revenue base they set aside and put it into this capital bank account. And it's shared between the city for oversight, really, and the convention center. And then over the years, it's worked up to 4%. And so 4% of the monthly revenues they really put back into this because the capital repairs are so extremely expensive we had to have a way to build up those funds because their operations, obviously convention centers lose money, not really gain money. So that's really why that came about. And we got together, Sam and his group and John and I and some of our group, and when the pandemic happened, said, just try not to take it below the 200,000, just so that they wouldn't have a hard time building it back up. That was kind of where that came from.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And then the other things for my report, just really quickly, we are knee-deep in audit, and hopefully that'll be coming before you this next meeting in June. And we're almost finished with that. We also have a lot of grant projects going on at the moment. The wastewater treatment plant grant really has 3 pots of money that we're trying to gain. We've already gotten approval for 2.7 million. We've also gotten a letter for the 5 million. We just haven't gotten the grant agreement back. It's a little bit slower on that process. And then we've gotten an unofficial approval from EDA for the 3 million, but no letter. So one is set, the other one is kind of set, and the third one is unofficially. So we're hopeful. How about that? But that only equates to 10.7 million. The project costs have gone up to 14.4 million. So there's a $3.6 million gap. I think I've talked to y'all about this a lot, but we're going to have to find a way to come up with that 3.6 million. So what we're hoping is that American Rescue Plan, they specifically speak to water sewer infrastructure, and they specifically spoke to broadband. So we know those two things are very important in that plan. We've already submitted a letter to the subcommittee that reviews those dollars and cents for the state, itemizing all of those projects, and in hopes that they will look at it, because they did specifically call us and say they're wanting more municipalities to look at this funds instead of just always universities. So we're trying to get in on the front end to try to gain some of that money for many of the projects that we have, because we're in the top 3 tourism draw for the state. So we're hopeful that we can use some of that to gain some ground with those funds. That's kind of what we're looking at to help with that gap. We're also, many of you already know the Elevate Branson grant's well on its way. It's already been grant approved, those kind of things, so we're working with them as well. And then we had a discussion with the CID board yesterday, the Highway 76 CID, and we're also looking at some federal grants and some other state grants and possibilities to help with that 76 project as well. And if you know anything about federal grants, state grants, those kind of things, there is a lot of red tape that you have to go through. Down to procurement has to be very specific, and we have to follow very specific rules. The design of these projects have to go according to federal guidelines. There's a lot of things. We have to do an overall draft of the whole design. We have to do cost-benefit analysis. There's a lot of things that wrap up into those grants, but the outcome, if we get approved, is very, very beneficial. So we're just going to keep moving forward, hopefully get some of this money. If we get half of what we want, yay. So we're just looking at it that way, but I want to keep y'all informed of what we're all doing right now in the finance department. And with that, I believe that is my report, unless you all have any questions. Yes, sir.
Hey, just a quick question on those grants. And the cost has escalated from 10 to 14. And I expect, being in that business in my life, it's going to go up more before you even get a contract out to the contractor. So is there any way to get any contingency line items in that as you're going along, or you have to wait to get hard numbers as you go?
The costs that have already gone up 3.6, one of the things that we had to do with the wastewater treatment plant is there was a matching piece, but we were able to get, when we thought the overall cost was 10.7, we were able to get another one of the agencies to give us a grant, and that was going to account for some of the matching. So right now, we've kind of exhausted those resources, so that 3.6, we're looking at the new monies that have become available as far as the American Rescue Plan to hopefully offset that. But you're right, I assume that project will probably get more expensive, not less, because of all the cost of doing business and building and those kind of things. So we'll have to keep that in mind. we may end up having to look at some of the monies that we have on hand. I hope not, because the water sewer department cash is the one that was hurt, I would say, almost the most from the pandemic. So we need to be careful about the monies we spend out of those operations. That's kind of what we're looking at. And so, I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, the thing is, it won't slow you down at the final result, right? I mean, the city will step in and cough up whatever.
We're
the
moving,
difference.
well, coughing up is really hard for me to swallow, Derry. But
We're gonna
how
cut
about
the-
we say,
We're gonna cut the alderman's salary, pay for it.
that'll account for like $80. But seriously, we're watching that. We are really watching that, so in hopes that we can stay ahead of that. One thing we just gotta be really careful of is not starting a project that we can't stop until we have the entire package of the money approved.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about the 10.7, the 3.6 is different, but the unofficial piece kind of causes me some concern. I think we're still gonna get it, but you just never know, so we're just kind of,
Gonna draw the line somewhere.
yeah, I just wanna
and
make
Mother
sure we
Nature's
have
gonna
that
put us
piece
out of
accounted
business.
for, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So without that, we pretty much shut the town down, you know?
yeah, we just don't wanna move forward with great big projects until we have the money all
Oh,
accounted for.
I've been on that committee, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. That's my report, unless you have any more questions. Okay,
I would make a motion to adjourn.
I would second that.
Have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? I didn't think so.
come on, that was a fun meeting, y'all know it.
That was fantastic.
Fun meeting is when they get to jump into priority.
Oh, yeah, those are coming.
Yeah.
Actually, I love those meetings.
See, Pam is all about that. Thank you.
Jamie. This is a great book for March. Open it.
This is good to be in person.
Yes, it is. No, it's good.
It's okay. I'm trying to.
That's what I always tell them. I'm a banker, I'll always take your money, so. Good to see y'all.
Whew, burning up.
Chill. Okay. I'm coming to you. Yes, absolutely right. But